Welcome to Chinquapin Cottage and this edition of the Chinquapin Cottage Conversations. This, our first conversation, is with a woman I've known most of my adult life, who has become to me almost like a second mother. I first met Shirley King through the magic of miniature golf, when I stopped by to play a round of miniature golf at a course owned by her late husband, Bob King, in Aiken, South Carolina. Over time, Bob, Shirley, their sons Brad and Jeff, would become close friends, almost like family. Bob, who was a businessman in Michigan, moved to South Carolina, pursued his dream of being a professional actor and singer. When he passed away, he was living life as a professional Santa Claus. And after his death, Shirley carried on his memory and his legacy by portraying Mrs. Claus at a variety of community events all over the Southeast, all over the country. Tonight, in our Chinquapin Cottage conversation, we talk about how joy is possible after tragedy. And so we welcome into our first edition of the Chinquapin Cottage Conversations my friend and someone who's almost like my second mama, Shirley King. Shirley, welcome into our first Chinquapin Cottage Conversation. It's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you, Tony. I'm glad to have you in my home.
First things first, how did Shirley King, wife and mother, become Mrs. Santa Claus?
Oh, that's a rather lengthy story. Actually, my husband was a professional singer and actor, and when we had grandchildren, he did not want to be working over the holidays, so he sort of morphed into being Santa so he could pretty much have his own schedule. Well, it was easy for me to become Mrs. Claus with him. And besides, the costume was gorgeous. I got this beautiful velvet costume from Adele's of Hollywood, and I thought I was really Queen Bee. Unfortunately, when he passed away, what do you do when you're a Mrs. Claus with no Santa? And so I had a commitment after he passed to do a story time, which was supposed to be just reading stories, but I knew I could make it more exciting than that. So we sing songs and we do stories with props and one magic trick. I have one magic trick. And it has certainly brought such joy to my holidays to spend time with the children in this way.
Shirley, when Bob passed away, did you immediately know that you were going to carry on his memory and his legacy by portraying Mrs. Claus?
Well, he died in September, so as soon as it was overseas and as soon as I got home, I called and canceled his commitments as Santa Claus, which of course, because many of them were for the two of us, that only left one commitment, and that was to the community center to do this story time with Mrs. Claus. So since it was so close to the time of the event, I thought I will do it and we'll see how it goes. And it was an immediate success. I loved it. It was fun. It was uplifting. And so I just said, well, if God opens these doors, that must be his plan for me. And I've had a really good balance, Tony. It hasn't been overwhelming, but it's been enough to really bring joy to my holidays.
Out of all the memories you made together, do you have a favorite memory of being Mrs. Claus alongside your Santa Claus?
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. A dream of his was to be a Santa in a parade. And a couple of years that didn't happen. He checked into it and they already had one or whatever. And then he got a call from a former pageant person that he had known who invited us to be in the Columbia Parade. it was his dream. It was a dream situation. It was a perfect day. We followed a band, and then they split, and our float came right up between them, and they passed us a microphone, which I don't know, that might have been a dangerous thing to do. But we then were each able to speak to the children, and that was sort of the highlight of our season that year.
Losing a spouse is a profound loss. What role did your faith play in your being able to cope with your grief?
Oh, huge, Tony, huge. And it wasn't only my faith, it was Bob's faith. I knew he was a Christian. I knew he had accepted Christ, and I knew he knew where he was going. I don't think that it was one of those where he did have poor health, but he went very suddenly. So it wasn't one of those, I have a last minute conversion. He had Christ in his heart for many years. So that in itself brought peace to me, knowing that he was no longer in pain, no longer in stress, and that he was with our Lord. So that brought me peace, the fact that it happened so suddenly and that he didn't have to suffer and wasn't in extensive pain. And the next day after he died, it was at night, and I just had this sense of calm and peace in my soul. And you know, there's that song, there's a peace in my heart that the world never gave, a peace it cannot take away. And that sort of like looped in my head. And I had a peace mostly because I knew where he was. I knew I'd see him someday. And I am grateful that he didn't have a long, painful, suffering illness and that he flew up to glory.
Shirley, as a person of tremendous faith, do you see any spiritual conflict with portraying a character that some people claim is rooted in the pagan traditions?
Oh, you mean the Mrs. Claus thing? Oh, yeah. I don't think of her as pagan at all. No, and I just look as a supporting character because Santa Claus was based on Saint Nicholas, and which is a religious figure. And to me, Christmas is all about joy and giving and sharing the joy of the season. And it is a way to share Christ as well because, you know, children are very blunt. And a lot of times you'll say, what's your favorite part about Christmas? And they'll say, that's when baby Jesus was born. And that's when I give them that extra hug because we kind of share that knowledge. But no, I don't have any conflict with that at all.
Shirley, why do you think little children and even childlike adults like myself respond so enthusiastically to Santa and Mrs. Claus?
Well, of course, Santas aren't all created equal. Now, you do know, Tony, that all these Santas are really Santa's helpers. The real Santa's up there at the North Pole. And these are just his friends and helpers. And so they bring their own personality to the Santa experience. Some are more outgoing and effusive than others. Some are quieter. I have a really dear Santa friend who does hospice. And he and his wife are very, very special. And so I think for the most part, Santas are joyful and uplifting and encouraging. And now, Santa will check to see if you are on the naughty or nice list. Mrs. Claus believes that all children are nice and all children are trying to be good. And so we don't have to worry about that like Santa does.
You lived your life and portrayed Mrs. Claus alongside a man who, in my estimation, lived his life with the same brand of joy that Santa Claus is traditionally portrayed to have had. What do you believe are the keys to lifelong joy?
Oh, there are many. There are many. First of all is the peace and self-confidence that you can have when you know that you have Christ in your heart You know who's in control of your life, and you know where you're headed for eternity. So all the rest of this is just today, and you can look at even the bumps in the road, the sad times. It's just today. It's not eternity. This is just today. I think joy is something you can choose. You know, everybody has bad days. And I sometimes will catch myself and say, you know, this may not be your best day, but you can choose to view it in a positive way. And this too shall pass. And I don't know, I have a friend who, we have our little catchphrases. This too shall pass, and it is what it is. And so when you look at life in perspective and you just say that this is just today, then you can, that opens the door for the joy to come in.
Okay, you've been doing it a while. If you could offer any advice to those aspiring Clauses who might be watching this or listening to this today, what would you say to them?
Network. I have learned so much by going to meetings of other Santas. You would not believe it's a whole nother world out there, but they're wonderful people and they're willing to share their knowledge. They've been through it, some that have been Santa and Mrs. for a long time, and through that they've evolved answers to difficult questions. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can talk to them and learn from their experiences. And then as you get farther down your road, you can share your experiences with others.
Shirley King, thank you for sitting in on this edition of the Chinquapin Cottage Conversations. And to you, Brad, Jeff, and your entire family, Merry Christmas, Shirley.
Thank you, Tony. A Merry Christmas to you, and I know you will be a really good boy between now and Christmas.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Chinquapin Cottage Conversations. And I'll say again, whatever your faith tradition, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, however you are spending this holiday season, I wish for you love and warmth and joy for you and your entire family. And thank you again for visiting Chinquapin Cottage.